Assalamu alaikum. This is a special digital notes series video on the Hizb al Bahr. Now, I don't know at this point whether I'm going to have other episodes. We'll see, inshallah. So, in videos number 14 and 15 of the Shams al series, I spoke at length about the 28 huruf, the Arabic language, and some of their secrets on how to harness the properties and powers of the 28 letters. And I spoke about the two verses that contain all of these 28 letters and how they're tied to the saints of the north and the south. Well, you'd be surprised that there's actually another tie-in between the Shams al-Ma'arif and the Hizb al Bahr. Not directly, but indirectly, and bear with me, you'll see it in a moment. This is a copy of the Hizb al Bahr that's sold in the Indian subcontinent. It contains 3 Shadhili texts: the Hizb al Bahr, the Dalai al Khairat, as well as the Qasida Burda, all 3 gems from the Shadhili Tariqa that have become quite pervasive across just about all orders of Tasawwuf. In this book, we see there's an opening dua that precedes the Hizb al Bahr. Now, this opening dua is not standard in other regions. It's something very, very specific to the Indian subcontinent. If one looks at the commentary by Sidi Sheikh Ahmad Zarruq on the Hizb al Bahr, he wrote a wonderful commentary, and I highly recommend you get a hold of it. It's available on archive.org. In the commentary, following the Hizb al Bahr, there's an actual closing dua, and this dua, which is a nicer, handy, colorful print, this dua, not many know about it. So one could just recite the Hizb al Bahr and follow it up with this closing dua. It has a heavy emphasis on Allah's Nur, and in a certain sense, as one practitioner of the Hizb al Bahr explained it to me, it is to replenish your light with a better, divine, complete, perfect light following your recitation. Now, if one moves further east of Africa, where Sidi Zarruq was from, he arrived to the Indian subcontinent, we see another addition to the Hizb al Bahr, a historic addition by the Amils here, and one comes across the opening dua, which is very, very popular in the Indian subcontinent. What one notices at the end of this opening dua are the individual huruf, the 28 huruf, and preceding that is this verse from Surah Al-Fath, which we covered in video number 15 in the Shams al series, and I won't be repeating the explanation about this verse. It's enough to say that in this opening dua, aside from a protective hisar nature of its opening, very opening, see the Ayatul Kursi, you're also tapping into the power and the secrets of the 28 letters. And then of course you have the Hizb al Bahr, and there's this book, which is printed in India, Delhi, and widely available. This book contains a lot of properties on use of the Hizb al Bahr. I won't be mentioning those properties because the book has done a wonderful, wonderful job in the margins. But it tells you when to recite, how many times to recite. If you decide to do the seclusion ritual, which is very specific to the Indian subcontinent, in the month of Safar, the days of the 6th, 7th, 8th of Safar, or the 7th, 8th, or 9th, depending on which day you start from, this book is your friend. Get a copy. So really, all of this stuff is optional. One's not obligated to, but if one decides to, by having the opening dua, one is tapping into the powers of the 28 huruf. Now, most people, they recite the Hizb al Bahr as is, as it was received from Imam Shadhili. There are some minor variations in the text of the Hizb al Bahr, but they are very minor in nature. If you have come across Sidi Ahmed Zarruq's commentary on the Hizb al Bahr, which is a famous commentary and a wonderful book for you to read, one notices that in addition to the Hizb al Bahr, he also provides a closing dua. Just to point out to the viewers that he was of the Shadhili Tariqa, and he's one of the later spiritual successors of Imam Shadhili. So you have this additional closing dua. Let's look at this dua, the smaller handy version. It's easier for me to flip the page. First thing one notices in the supplementary closing dua is that there is an emphasis on Allah's Nur, and one practitioner of the Hizb al Bahr, who's been reciting it for 30 years, explained it to me. By reciting these verses about Allah's Nur, one ends up replenishing one's light with a better light, a divine light, and that this is one of the secrets of the closing dua that follows the Hizb al Bahr. There's other properties as well, of course, but they're known as secrets for a reason. Speaking of the 28 letters and the verse that contains all the 28 letters, this is Surah Al-Fath, and it's this final verse. The editor and translator of this translation gives it a heading, Believer's Description of the Torah, as well as the believer's description of the Gospel. And frequently the Quran reminds the reader about the previous books that were sent to the prior prophets, which were later corrupted. But if one were to look for the specific verse that the Quran is mentioning, you will find, even in the highly edited and modified current versions of the Old Testament as well as the Gospels. Speaking of the Gospels, earlier this year I had come across a wonderful story by this author from the Indian subcontinent, Khwaja Hasan Nizami, who narrates stories about the Hizb al Bahr from his travels across the planet during the late stages of the British Empire. And here's a very, very fascinating story where he speaks about his trip to Egypt, where he came across a local Coptic Christian priest who was reciting the Hizb al Bahr daily. The author of this book was quite shocked to see a Christian priest reciting the Hizb al Bahr, and the priest told him that he personally does not believe in the Trinity. He's not one of those Christians who believes in the Trinity. He even has a copy of the Quran in his private chamber in his church. Fascinating story. Here you have a non-Muslim who's gotten a hold of the Hizb al Bahr, mind you, from the country where the Hizb al Bahr was received, Egypt, and he cannot live without the Hizb al Bahr. And this is followed by a follow-up story where the same Christian priest had once asked a young girl, one of his congregants, to recite the Hizb al Bahr because she wanted to see the divine light. And he was afraid that if he were to give the Hizb al Bahr to the young congregant to recite, his secret would be up. He had not converted to Islam, but the very fact that a Christian priest would give a member of his congregation the Hizb al Bahr, a Muslim litany, to recite would be quite scandalous. Now the young girl was persistent. At first she was shocked, but then she actually recited the Hizb al Bahr for a few nights, and then a miracle happened.
If you have been meaning to support this channel on Patreon, I do recommend you head over to patreon.com/princeAmori